Listen to part of a discussion in a music appreciation class. The professor is discussing Edvard Grieg. Norwegian composer Edvard Grieg.
Today I want to talk to you about a Norwegian composer, Edvard Grieg. Grieg was born in 1843, and at that time Norway was part of Sweden. And before that, it had been part of Denmark, with everything cultural revolving around Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. Well, at an early age, Grieg was taught piano by his mother, and then when he was 15, he went to Germany, to Leipzig, to the conservatory, to study music and to become a musician and a composer.
Why did he go to Germany to study? Wasn't there any place in his country to study?
The German conservatory was well known and well respected. In fact, it was one of the best in Europe, and people who wanted the best training needed to go to conservatories like the Leipzig Conservatory. And after he completed his studies in Leipzig, Grieg returned to Copenhagen to write music. One of his first works was a symphony, and it reflected good technical skills that he had probably acquired in Leipzig.
Is this one of his works that became famous?
Well, it is a recognized work, but the symphony really started Grieg in the direction for which he is known. The style in which he wrote the symphony was very Germanic. But as Grieg wrote more, he began to develop a sense of awareness about Norway and realized he wanted to create music that would be recognized as typically Norwegian. Do any of you have any ideas why Grieg would want to deviate from writing a German-style music, a style that he learned, to write while in Leipzig?
I read something about his life once, and I remember that he lived in Oslo, Norway. Probably because he was Norwegian, he wanted to try to develop something that would be Norwegian and not Danish, Swedish, or German, even though Norway was part of Sweden and had been part of Denmark.
You're right. And also, Grieg loved to listen to Norwegian folk music. When he was living in Oslo, after he moved from Copenhagen, he did move to Oslo, and there he played music and taught music mainly to earn a living. Most of the composing he did had to be done in free time and during the summers, when he was on vacation, or on holiday as the Europeans called it. His greatest masterpiece was sketched out one summer while he was on vacation. When someone thinks of Norway and its music, this is the piece which is thought of first. Does anyone know the piece I am talking about?
I'm not sure, but I think you were talking about his piano concerto in A minor. But I'm not sure why people think of it as Norwegian.
You're right that it is his piano concerto in A minor, and it is considered Norwegian because it has elements of the country's folk music and displays tones and feelings of what Grieg thought about nature and the character of the people. Kind of feelings of patriotism and pride for his country, and how he reacted to the natural landscape, nature in general, and to the people. Grieg really loved being in nature and had even built a little cabin near one of the fjords where he could go for the solitude and compose his music. That is one example of why his moods probably showed his feelings for nature in his music.
Did he ever leave Oslo and quit teaching music?
Yes. When Grieg was about 30 years old, he received what was called an artist's grant, which was paid to him every year. And with this money he would write full-time, and he didn't have to teach or conduct anymore. So, when he began receiving this grant, he moved back to his hometown of Bergen. And there, in Bergen, he spent the rest of his life composing. But he also made some concert tours in Europe after he went back to Bergen. Grieg really wrote many kinds of music during his life. His only large concert works were the symphony and his concerto in A minor. But he wrote sonatas for the violin and piano, and songs based on the traditional peasant dances and music. He wrote pieces for choirs too, and chamber music. His music became very popular. Actually, people everywhere, and not just in Norway, liked his music. His goal was to create music which people would identify with Norway. He wanted to give the Norwegian people a national form of music. Probably he would have been pleased to believe he was Norway's national composer. But he became famous beyond the borders of Norway. His works were an inspiration for other composers, partly because he was able to express feeling and emotion in his music.
Well, maybe we could call him a musical patriot.
I think you have a good point. He did draw on the country's folk music for ideas, and he loved the fjords and mountains of Norway, And I think his music reflects all of that.
Yes, I think you both understand Grieg's musical personality and his style of music.
I think he was a type of artist. You know, a painter paints scenery and local events and themes. Grieg just did the same thing, but with music.
Yeah, I think you are right.
Now, let's spend the rest of the time we have in listening to part of Grieg's Concerto for the piano in A minor.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
Number 24. What is the discussion mainly about? Number 25. How does the professor emphasize his point about Grieg's study in Germany? Number 26. What are two key concert works mentioned in the discussion? Click on two answers. Number 27. According to the discussion, what are some ideas Grieg incorporated into his music? Click on three answers.
Listen again to part of the discussion, then answer the question.
Grieg was born in 1843, and at that time Norway was part of Sweden, and before that it had been part of Denmark, with everything cultural revolving around Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark.
Number 28. Why does the professor say this?
At that time Norway was part of Sweden, and before that it had been part of Denmark.
Listen again to part of the discussion, then answer the question.
Well, maybe we could call him a musical patriot.
I think you have a good point. He did draw on the country's folk music for ideas, and he loved the fjords and mountains of Norway, and I think his music reflects all of that.
Number 29. What can be inferred about the students?